Welcome, welcome again to our class on Schools of Organizational Change. In my previous video, I introduced the Schools of Organizational Change, and I stated that we have two categories, the ones that look at change from the elements of change and those that look at change from a process perspective. Now, for those that look at change from the elements, we covered the individual school of organizational change, and more specifically, we looked at outcome. We looked at outcome model. So for today's class, we're going to go to the group organizational change. And with the group organizational change, here we argue that people do not always act as individuals within an organization. They act as members of a group who are bound by some norms, some values, some level of socialization by the members of the organization. So welcome to our class today as we introduce the topic of group organizational change. You're most welcome to our class today. All right. So whenever we think about the group change, the theorists who believe in this approach, they believe that people do not always work as individuals in an organization. Individuals in an organization work in groups. They work in groups in terms of departments, in terms of centers. You know, there's usually a collective group, which could either be formal or informal. Formal meaning, you know, bound by some hierarchy. You belong to the same department, you belong to the same level, but also informal, meaning, you know, the socialization, the people you hang out with within an organization. And so because of that, the behavior of the individuals is seen to be modified or changed in the light of groups' prevailing practices and norms. And this is where, if your behavior does not conform to the practices and the norms of the larger group, you're likely to be punished. And you see this happening a lot. You get into a new organization, you're new, you are very excited, very energetic, and you go to an organization and you find the organization has a culture that is contrary to your expectations. And because of that culture, you get assimilated. And in case you're not assimilated in the culture, the group has the power to actually punish you. Now, this kind of a change process aims at influencing the norms and the roles and the values of the group, so that members within the group can be able to be agile and can be able to want to change. So this theory or this school of organizational change borrows a lot from Lewin's three-step model. Now, the three-step model emphasizes on bringing about organizational change through teams or working groups rather than individuals. Now, the three-stage model is made up of that. You know, there is the unfreeze, change, and refreeze. And what Lewin argues, or the illustration that is provided, is like how you take some raw meat in the freezer and you take it out, you thaw it, that is called unfreezing. You put it in hot water, or you can, you can put it in the stove, whatever you need to do to make sure that the pieces of the meat sort of detach. That's what is done in an organization. You have to unfreeze. You have to unfreeze those norms. You have to break down the status quo, the things that tie these groups together so that they resist change as a group, so that members of that group can be malleable to want to change. Organizations do different things to actually unfreeze. You're going to be seeing some examples of how organizations do that. Once the group has been broken down, people are now working as individuals, sort of divide and rule. And now you realize, oh, I'm here as an individual, not as a group. Then they are malleable to change. And when they are malleable to change, you can actually now introduce the change processes. You can come up with new ways of doing things. You can show through role modeling. You can give them opportunities to practice. You can actually do a lot because now the environment is acceptable or it's adaptable to the change. Once the change process has happened, Lewin says now the last step is to refreeze. Refreeze is where now that becomes the norm, or it becomes the way of doing things over here. It becomes the new norm, the new values, the new way of doing things. But before you unfreeze, there's a first step. And this first step, we're going to call it the pre-change step. Before you come up with, this is what I want to break down, it's very important to understand what needs to be broken down. And these are some of the things you need to evaluate in the pre-change step. First of all, you have to ask yourself, what is the goal of the change? Why do we want to change? Start with why. What is the purpose of the change? Why should the organization all change, and how does that relate to the vision, the mission, and the objectives of the organization? If this is not aligned, people are likely to resist because, of course, they will pull out that this is against the policy, and we do not want that. Once you have realized that there's an alignment between the purposes of change and the change objectives, then you need to pick out the elements that need to be changed. Do you want a change in the structure? Are you changing a system? Are you changing the processes? Are you changing the culture? What are some of the specific elements within the organization do you need changed? What is the degree of the change? Is it holistic? Are you going to do departmental? Are you going to do piecemeal? You have to identify to what extent do you want this change to actually happen? How long? What is the time that's required for you to actually implement the change? What are the expected outcomes? What does the future look like? What's the vision? It's very important to note that because people need to be told, once you have changed, this is how the future looks like. Who will be the change agent? Are you going to get an internal change agent? Or are you going to get an external change agent? Both decisions come at a cost. Some changes may require that you have to use an internal change agent because of the sensitivity of the change processes. Other instances, you may not have the capacity or the expertise to actually do the change. And so you may need to have an external change agent. How much resources do you need allocated for the change process? What is your budget like? Because your budget will determine the extent of the change. And what's the degree of resistance? Is this something that people are looking forward to have? Or is this something that they really do not want to have? Who is bringing in the resistance? You have to find that out. Now, The next step, once you have identified what needs to be changed, then of course we go to Lewin's 3-stage model. And the first step is the Unfreeze model. Unfreeze, or the Unfreeze stage, this is where you are breaking down the status quo. You are making this chunk or this group that is so tight to sort of break apart so that the members within the organization can be malleable to accept the change processes. Organizations do this in different ways. There are those organizations that do job rotations so that you can change people from accustomed rituals, places, social relations, take them out of their place so that that glue, the glue that was making people to be tied together can actually melt away. Other ways we see organizations unfreezing is undermining or distracting social support systems that don't support the change initiatives. We've seen budget cuts being done in some organizations, sort of to undermine the social support systems. We've seen this even at a large scale at national level, coming up with policies of money laundering so that you can distract and undermine social support systems that don't support change initiatives, etc. Linking reward with change and punishment with resistance. We already saw the effect of consequences or reinforcement in the outcome model. When change is linked to reward, then people are likely to want to change. Or when punishment is linked to resistance, it's one way of unfreezing. And of course, creating an awareness and desire for people to want to change. Then once you have unfrozen, the next step is to change. And these are the steps that are required for people to want to change the change implementation. We have 2 steps, identification and internalization. Now, with identification, this is where the change agent provides a model behavior. They show a model behavior. This is where we get people going for benchmarking exercises, sort of to see what other people who have doing the things that we are proposing have done. So we are providing them a model behavior. Or where we get people to come and give us seminars or trainers or give us development activities so that we can actually embrace the change. So that is the first step, identification, getting people to have a model behavior, getting people to see the future, to see the vision, to see how things are likely to look like once change efforts have been implemented. Now, once you have shown people the model behavior, the second step is initializing. Now, with initializing is providing individuals with opportunities to practice these new skills, new behaviors, knowledge, and tools. Remember, you've already given them the model behavior. You have trained them. You have given them activities. They know what needs to be done. They have the knowledge. They have the skills. Initializing is giving them the ability that we talked about in the outcome model, encouraging them to use the new skills and new techniques. Finally, you refreeze. People have learned new skills. They have learned new techniques. Now it is the time to reinforce. Now, if you realize the 3-stage model mirrors the outcome model. A and D is sort of at the unfreezing change of steps. Knowledge and abilities is at the change step, and then we have reinforcement. Reinforcement is stabilizing those change efforts, providing the resources that are required for change to actually happen. Linking reward to change and punishment to resistance. That way you're able to reinforce new behaviors and skills. Evaluation and feedback involving and evaluating people giving you feedback and follow-up loops, so that the process is complete. So the Lewin model is one of the models that is used extensively, especially when it comes to group change. I hope you get time to reflect on the Lewin and sort of come up with examples of how you have seen different organizations actually use the Lewin model to bring about changes within an organization. Thank you. That marks the end of our lecture. I wish you a wonderful time. Goodbye.